All right, so we'll go ahead and start. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. We have our decorum speech, which in my world is one sentence, be nice or leave. And then, so we'll start with roll call. Thank you.
Representative Angelos. Representative Burkhart.
Here.
Representative Byron.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Singh.
Here.
Representative Storer.
Here.
Vice Chairman Western. Representative Winter. And Madam Chairman Newsom.
Here. Thank you. We're starting with one of our own, House Bill 165, sponsored by Representative Byron. So Andrew, if you want to go down and tell us all about this.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Members of the committee, I bring you House Bill 165, Access Points on State Land Study. Members, this bill is a study bill, which is certainly not unique to the body, but not a common bill that's written. So I worked with LSO to develop a study bill so we could get a better idea of what is going on certain state lands, moving into the interim and beyond, specific to commercial guiding, fishing guiding. We did have a number of our bills defeated on day one that we worked during the interim on, but what I did realize through the last interim is we really wanted more data points. I'll use an example up in my neck of the woods. There's a pretty esteemed creek called Fish Creek that sits on a state section of land on Highway 390 that some have heard about, and people will walk all the way across that piece of land to fish and commercially guide just a little short, tiny stretch of a very, very world-class fishery. So that got me thinking, without the capacity myself to know how much more of this is going on, where else is this potentially happening? I did reach out to other departments in the state. Some had an idea, a rough idea of what kind of guiding may have been going on and may not have. And I think OSLI covers so many acres that I didn't want to dive into that or task them too quickly with getting us those answers. So, I think the bill can speak for itself. There's an amendment that I appreciate the good chairwoman brought. And I'm sure that the office will have some opinions and some thoughts on this. Without data, we don't know what's going on, and I certainly think it's important to gain that data. So a number of you are sponsors on this bill, and I'm happy to stand for questions, dive in deeper. What would you like me to do?
I think we'll start with questions. Any questions for Representative Byron on the bill? No, we're letting him off easy. Oh, yes,
Madam
Representative Burkhart.
Chairwoman, so actually, I'm not familiar with the bill. So if you could tell me exactly what it does, thank
So
you.
if you would just walk us through the bill.
Thank you, Representative Burkhart. Madam Chairwoman, through you, this is a request from the Office of State Lands to report back to this committee, if passed, how much, what type of may or may not be going on specific to commercial fishing. So as you members of the committee know, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres that they control with many, many bodies of water throughout the entire state. And, without knowing, Representative Burkhart, what may or may not have been going on them in terms of commercial fishing, we really saw a gap as we worked on it during the interim last year. We saw a gap in not having data as to what type of commercial fishing was going on. Some of the feedback I have actually gotten, Madam Chairwoman, is from Sportsman's Group, a bit worried about the access point language. And I don't want anyone to get lost on that. I think it was more when a commercial activity happens, at what point do they, literally enter that state land and do their commercial activity. So with that, I think if you start on page 1, you can see the catch title, the description of the bill, And once again, this is a study bill, so it really, the intent is only to last through this interim. And hopefully and report back to this committee on what their findings are. And it does allow them and ask them to go talk to other departments in the state, potentially other states and other agencies and federal agencies at what they do, what they don't do as it relates to commercial fishing. Any sort of comparative costs, any sort of programs that currently exist. I think it's easy to talk about state parks in this situation. There's a fair amount of state park fishing, commercial fishing that goes on. They have a pretty good idea of those outfitters that are doing that, and there is a permitting system. But in talking to state parks, there's also some identified waters that they're not as sure. So I think in general, it just allows these agencies to work together, report back to us, should we decide, or maybe even if we don't decide to sponsor an interim topic on this topic.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was just looking, and sorry if I missed this in your presentation, but on page 1 and on page 4, it notes that they should have it completed by October 1st of 2024. Did you have this discussion with the agency to make sure that they're able to complete that? And that might be a question for the agency as well. And I mean, I also noticed that that it's effective immediately, so that way they can get right to work. But just curious on your thoughts.
Representative Byron.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Larson, I did not have that discussion. When writing a study bill, which, like I said, is not super common, I did have, I'll backtrack a little, and you didn't even mention this, but I did have a slight appropriation for it, given the temperature of what I was expecting in this session. I didn't think an appropriation was necessary, and it probably would have potentially tanked the bill, sunk the bill, if you will, no pun intended. But I really think through that date, Representative Larson, that we will be able to get a good grasp. The fishing season, the commercial fishing season really wraps up by the fall. There is obviously hope that we have one more meeting after that date, but it's to the two chairwomen to decide if that's going to be the case. But the intent is to start now, give it a pretty wide net, cast a wide net to try to figure out how much, where, why, when, that they can figure out. So yes, the intent was to be a bit more broad than specific.
Any other questions for the representative? Okay, Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Representative Byron, so we get the study. Obviously, the whole point is to answer questions that we have. What is legislation, where do you think this leads to down the road? With that kind of information, depending on what we learn.
Representative Byron.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Representative Western, I felt after this summer and the previous interim and hearing from constituents all over the state, not in my neck of the woods, believe it or not, but on most other rivers, that we are really facing a major issue when it comes to commercial fishing guiding. And if I can use the words free for all is what it currently is statewide. So, I think that the intent with this data is to continue to refine and maybe work off what we passed through this committee last interim to better understand, where we might have shortcomings and where we might have potential revenue sources as well, where these commercial outfits are using our resources, using our state resources, using, boat ramps, et cetera, and just to try to have a more broad approach. If you look at Montana, for example, and their fishing guiding, it's a statewide approach. So you're commercially outfitted to guide in the entire state. Now, obviously, where we have ran into issues is our specific access points. That's why the bill refers to it. So As we were in Casper, there was discussion on whether or not you're on BLM land, private land, game and fish land, Bureau of Rec land. So I think generally it was just trying to get more data in hopes to add to and maybe refine legislation that this committee passed through last interim.
Any other questions? Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So given that there is agency-provided administrative impact, would you say that it might be a wise idea to amend that as a standing committee amendment, so that way the body can decide whether they'd like to fund that or not? Or would you rather bring that yourself or someone else bring it as a committee of the whole amendment?
Representative Byron.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative, I think that I'm going to default to the office on this. They do have an impact that they presented to the bringer of the bill and I believe this committee. So I did have an appropriation in it originally, but this is certainly a topic and a swath of state lands that I had no idea to really pinpoint that on. So I do appreciate the number they brought to us. And I think it would be the will of this committee whether or not we want to, or not, and bring it to the body. So.
Anything else from the committee? Okay, I think we'll move on to the office that will be affected by this study bill. If you want to come up, however many of your folks you want to come up, bring up with you, that would be fine. And then Jennifer, if you would introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm Jennifer Scoggin. I'm the Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. With me today is Deputy Director Jason Crowder. Jason has been the lead on numerous studies that have come through our office similar to this in nature. As you might imagine, we have a couple of concerns regarding staffing, funding, timing, all those things. Jason has done the research and talked with the staff internally. He also has some of the history of access points. So with that, Madam Chairwoman, I would yield to Deputy Crowder.
That would be great. Deputy Crowder.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. As Representative Byron mentioned, we reviewed the bill as a study bill. There's obviously a program that may come out of the back end of this, but the initial review was just how do we complete a study? What would be the best information provided back to the committee out of the study and give you the best information to take action going forward? We have done some.
Is your microphone on?
Yes, I can pull it closer. Thank you. We have done a few other studies for the management of state lands, and when we do those, we pull from whatever internal sources we can. That includes staffing and any data that we have, but we also look to make sure that we're providing good information back to the committee. It's important to note that the capabilities of our staff are specific to leasing and not necessarily to deriving new markets or digging into new things that are recreational in nature. We are obviously oil and gas centric. We understand that industry very well. We understand all of the access for that industry to get to our lands, but understanding what recreational needs or the access points or how current individuals are using those lands, we simply don't have that capacity in our office. We don't have a recreation specialist, if you will. So that's why we offered in the fiscal note to hire a consultant to do this study for you. We took a stab at that cost. We put $75,000 in that fiscal note. That comes from, some of you may remember, the office did a study at the direction of the legislature to see what it would take for us to manage all federal land in the state of Wyoming, not own it, but manage it. And that study cost the office $75,000. And I think that was done back in 2017, 2018.
Deputy Director, our page says 45,000.
I apologize. The fiscal note we provided stated 75,000. So anyway, we're taking a stab in the dark with that 75,000, and if that's something the committee wanted to move forward with or a different amount, again, that's where it came from, was another study, maybe of similar size and scope. It reached out to adjacent states. It reached out to the federal government and it understood how users were using the land and how that could be brought down into a program, a revenue generating program. So that's the best we could offer for you. We apologize we weren't able to make your interim meetings to provide some of this data to you, but it's important to note that we do allow fishing, obviously, on state trust lands if you can access it. And that's offered through Chapter 13, which is general day use recreation. It's not for commercial guiding. We also offer a temporary use permit if you are making that into a commercial business. Obviously, for hunters, the guiding and outfitting, that practice is under that temporary use permit structure for exclusive and non-exclusive outfitting, and that's charged at a specific rate. That's also guided by the outfitter or guiding and outfitting licensing board. So there is an oversight structure for those individuals. And like Representative Byron mentioned, it's a little bit of the Wild West when you talk about commercial fishing because they are not guided by that same board. There's not a board or a licensing board that oversees them. However, we do issue permits for commercial fishing as well. So the idea is that if you are organized, if you're making money off of the recreational use on state land, you should pay for that. You should be permitted appropriately, and you don't fall under Chapter 13 of the board's rules, which is just general day use. So we do currently have 15 active commercial fishing permits. Those are statewide permits, so they can take anybody anywhere. They can float the river or any body of water or walk to Fish Creek, as Representative Byron mentioned, to help people fish. Those are offered at roughly $360 per year, so the annual revenue is $5,400 for that activity. So it's relatively light in use, and that's probably why we haven't focused on this particular use case to dig into it, is it's not heavily utilized. There's not a lot of revenue coming off of it, so we focus our attention elsewhere. One of the other things to mention is that we do have fishing access points, or at least boat ramps that the Game and Fish manage on state trust lands that allow the public to go in and put in or take out the raft or whatever they're using. There's only 2 of those across the state. Both of those leased to Game and Fish. Each 2 are for an amount of $1,500. So another not large revenue generator. But we also don't know who's using that. Obviously, Game and Fish is managing it, but we don't know who they're letting on. We're assuming it's the general public, but we don't have much more information past that. One of the good things that will come out of this study, Bill, if it's passed, is an understanding of how our lands are being utilized for this, if there is a good program, but also to answer a lot of questions of that use. Are there people who put in on state lands that we don't know about, put in actual watercraft that we need to identify or maybe have a permit with them that we don't currently know? Obviously, that leads into the enforcement structure. I would love to stand on a riverbank and enforce that, but I don't have the time, and the director probably wouldn't let me. But we would have to employ another agency to do that, and they've expressed not a great desire to, and it would be a lot of work for them. But also, some of the legalities of charging for these types of permits or within this type of program. Putting in on state land is obviously one thing. Floating through state lands is another one, and do we need to charge folks for doing that or not? And that's certainly a legal question we can dig into as a result of the study, Bill, if it were to pass. But Madam Chairwoman, that's what I have for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for, go ahead, Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Director Crowder, so I just want to first make sure I'm understanding correctly. You said for $1,500, they have, if the access point is on state land, they basically get to control that access point, and that access point is leased to them? Am I understanding that correctly?
Madam Chairwoman, to the Game and Fish Department, that's correct.
Okay.
Representative Western, follow up? Okay, good. Any other questions for OSLI? Representative Burkhart.
So, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Excuse me. Deputy Crowder, how would you know if a commercial fisher guide service is accessing the state lands unless they tell you? I'm just curious, so.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Burkhart, that's a great question. We wouldn't know. Of the 15 that we currently have under a permit, they are coming to us and saying, we are utilizing your lands for commercial purposes. we feel we should get a permit. So it's the honor system for sure.
Thank you.
Representative, no? Okay. Anyone else, questions? Okay, so stay close. Director Osterland, would you come up and visit with us about this? So what I'm wondering is if we're asking the correct agency to do this study, or if it would be better with Game and Fish. And if you have a feeling on that, oh, and tell us who you are and where you work. Thanks.
Committee members, Madam Chair, I'm Alan Osterland, Chief of Fisheries for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. So we do, as you might recall during the interim session, have been gathering some information on amount of use on some specific points around the state. High impact areas like the Bighorn River, the Green, the New Fork, the Platte. I think that study showed, and we did that for 2 years, and we're going to do it again here in the future, but it was an internal study done by our biologists where we put out digital or time-lapse cameras on these access points. And that way you can just get a general amount of use. We follow that up with creel surveys where we'd have a technician go out and talk to fishermen and see if it was a outfitted or guided trip. And as was mentioned, it's kind of an honor system. Some folks don't want to tell you, even though there is no oversight. But the information that we got, we compiled all that. And so we already do have some of that information.
So Representative Byron, I'm wondering if some of this information is already available and just needs compiled in some way, or do you anticipate wanting somebody to go out in the field and look at these points? Or I guess I'm trying to get more clear vision of what you want this to tell you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. No, and I appreciate the Game and Fish commenting on this. I think we heard very loud and clear from Game and Fish when we were in Casper, what they knew. They talked about where some of their trail cams were, some of their time-lapse work. And they are much like OSLI limited with their staffing and timeframe and just general ability. We have a very large state. So I think this bill lands right where my intent is for it to land. It also allows these agencies to talk amongst each other because I view it as a statewide, I don't want to call it a problem, a statewide opportunity to try to address this issue. And I appreciate the data we do have and recognize it is vague because it's hard to gather that data. So to that question, yeah, I do think this lands where and I also think it will encourage, and the intent of this bill, and it's in there here, to allow these agencies, federal and otherwise, to chat. Part of Deputy Director Crowder's point was to potentially outsource this so they can compile all this information for us.
Do you have anything else?
Madam Chair, committee members, I would just offer that we certainly would share all the information that we have to a consultant or any other agency.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your help. Any questions? John, I'm sorry, Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, do you have a feeling relative to setting up a outfitter board similar to the hunting outfitters board right now? Do you have any thoughts on that? And would it be wise for us to, as a committee, to develop a bill to establish that?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Winters. So I do have some thoughts on that, and in my mind, it would make sense where you're having an outfitter board that is a state agency that's already licensing and permitting big game hunters to have it under that umbrella. I understand the capacity issues that they'd have, and I would think it would have to have some help that would go with it, but you know, it certainly might give you some information on if you just started out with the basic licensing of the outfitters in the state. You know, we have some anecdotal information about how many fishing outfitters and guides we have. If you look at, we gather information from the BLM, how many they have permitted, say, in the North Platte, how many Forest Service outfitters that are licensed, permitted through them. And just, you know, talking with our regions and getting a number of what they think as far as commercial use is concerned. But that's not really a hard number. So it is a potential first step. If you had some information and you had people that were required to be licensed under the state for commercial use, in my mind, it would be a starting point to go into the next steps on really addressing some of these crowding issues.
Follow up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, as you know, the current state outfitter board does not want to have anything to do with the fishing. And so I would think that it might be wise to just go ahead, and I think it'd be a good starting point to establish an agency, right, you know, as soon as we can get one done. And that's going to get everybody's attention, and they're going to be wondering how they can get involved in it. Otherwise, they're going to, I mean, this will give you the Game and Fish and whoever else the opportunity and the reason to investigate this, I guess, depending on where it's at and what's going on, so.
Any comments on that? Wouldn't you agree? No.
Yes, I do agree with that, yes.
Anything else, John? Okay, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And that, so quick question. It sounds like you have a lot of this information already. If we just asked you for the information you had and asked for recommendations, say at a 50% accuracy level, can you give that to the committee?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, yeah, we can give you all the information you want. As far as accuracy level, we could swag it probably. I think that for the most part, people that are responding right now are pretty forthcoming, straightforward. Certainly, as the winds blow the potential for oversight and how that might impact their operations, those answers might become less forthcoming. But we would certainly share any information we got or we have. And like I said, we're looking at duplicating some of this analysis in probably the next year. We do have cameras out. We're planning to have cameras out in a lot of locations this summer too. So, and we're looking at having some technicians out there doing creel surveys to gather more of this information.
Follow up.
Follow up?
So, thank you. With that information and considering that we only have 2 state sections in every township, am I correct to assume that most access points right now are either private land or federal land?
Director.
Most of the access points are, I thought I heard Deputy Director Crowder say that there was only 2 state sections where we had leases, the department had leases with them. I know of 2, maybe these are the only 2, and these are up by Pinedale, one in New Fork, and, well, both on the New Fork, I guess, Mesa and Airport. But, you know, the department does have department fee title owned land where we have access points. BLM and Forest Service are probably the bulk of them. State Parks has some as well. If you look at Hot Springs, they're in the Bighorn. So it's a mixture. If I were to make a guess, I would say most of them are probably on BLM or Bureau of Reclamation.
And one last follow-up, Madam
bet.
Chair. So, one
Representative.
last follow-up. Which agency is the correct agency to do this work? Game and Fish or OSLI? In your opinion?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, I don't know as if it matters who has it, as long as, I think our agency and state lands has the same limitations. As I mentioned before, I have to advocate for two things. And one of them is the resource, and one of them is our personnel. And when our personnel are doing things that are more social oriented, like potentially limiting the amount of access on any stretch of river because of overcrowding, that's going to take away from their work that they're able to do on the resource. That's my concern. But if it were to be funded for a study where it doesn't impact either our agency's personnel workloads or their agency personnel workloads, I think that's a win.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And stay close, because I'm sure we'll have more. Director Glenn is here. I don't know if he has to comment or if he's just here for moral support. Okay. Then I think we'll move to public comment, if there's public comment on this bill. Not seeing anybody jump up, so I guess anybody online? No? Okay, so I guess we'll move it back to the committee. Committee, what's your pleasure? Representative Larson wants to move the bill. Do I have a second? Representative Byron will second. Okay, so I guess we can walk through the bill if you'd like.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Representative Larson.
is it acceptable to do an amendment at this?
Sure, we'll just start on page 1. Are there any amendments on page 1?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, I'd like to propose an amendment or move an amendment to insert the language after, on page 1, line 14, after investments, we want to insert in coordination with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And to explain my amendment a little bit, just sounds like Game and Fish has a closer relationship with the access points on state land. And so it just kind of clarifies that both agencies will be involved in the process.
Is there a second to that amendment? John Winter will second that. Discussion. Representative Byron.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. If you go to page 3, line 10, it specifically states a review of other agencies, both state and federal. So I think this is already handled within the bill, and it is the request, and it sounds like from our good staff at OSLI that they will be, if we move forward, this potentially outsourcing this to similar to some study bills last session. So while I appreciate the amendment from the bringer, I think that it is already clear in here that we can have that discussion within this bill. And if this body, remembers, I think we worked on this a lot during the interim, and I think that it was very clear that the Game and Fish capacity is arguably zero on this. So, I think that already within the bill, this amendment that's proposed is addressed.
Any other discussion? Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I appreciate that. The challenge I have with that language in subparagraph 6 is it's just a review of other agencies. It's not necessarily saying that that agency is going to be involved. It might just mean that they're going to be included in the report from state lands. So I would rather encourage that active involvement between the two agencies in my amendment.
Other discussion on the amendment? Representative Western?
Please get a second on that.
Yes, John. Okay, let's vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? Okay, that amendment passes. Did you get that, Barb? Okay, great. Moving on to page 2, I have an amendment that just is kind of a technical correction that on page 2, line 2, replaces department with office, since we're talking about the Office of State Lands. It's been moved, I guess I moved it. I don't know. So any discussion on that? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Okay. That passes. Any other amendments on page 2? Page 3? Page 4? Or page 5?
Madam Chairman.
Yep. Representative Larson.
Madam Chair, I'd like to propose or move an amendment to add a section for an appropriation of $75,000 as recommended by the agency.
Am I hearing a second for $75,000 appropriation? Oh, Representative Burkhart seconded that. Let's discuss that. Representative Byron?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. You know, while I really appreciate that, and I think we have to come up with a number, I think about a very large study bill that was outsourced last session that I believe was $50,000. And I really recognize that this office needs all the support they can get with how much they have to have on their plate. I just, we heard multiple times from the good deputy director that it's really just I think his words were a shot in the dark. So, I want to support them, so I'll be in favor of a appropriation. I just want to make sure this body thinks that's the right number.
Okay. Any discussion on $75,000? No? Any other discussion on the amendment?
Question.
We'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No. I think that carries. So that one passed. Any other amendments on the bill? Did you get that, Barb? Okay. So I guess we will go ahead and vote. So if you would call the roll.
Representative Angelos? Aye. Representative Burkhart?
No.
Representative Byron?
Aye.
Representative Larson?
Aye.
Representative Singh?
Aye.
Representative Storer by absentee, aye. Vice Chairman Western?
Aye.
Representative Winter?
Aye.
Chairwoman Newsom?
Aye.
8 aye, 1 no.
Okay. So Representative Byron, you'll take that on the floor. That'll be great. So now I would like to move into some interim topics since State Parks is here and OSLI is here. I would like to talk about Ranch A, which was a topic brought to me by Vice Chairman Lloyd Larson. He seems to think that needs to be a state park. So I think we'll add that to our interim topics, but if we could get a short version of what that looks like, where Ranch A is, and so if State Parks and OSLI want to come up and talk about that, whoever knows it best. So Director Glenn, I'm going to have you kick this off for us.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, Representative Larson has had discussions with Dave Glenn, Director of State Parks and Cultural Resources. Yes, Representative Larson has reached out to us and started to have conversations. I wanted to make sure this team was here together because State Lands owns the land and owns the facility, and they know the history on it. And then we also have the State Construction Department that's just done a facilities conditions assessment a couple of years ago. So if possible, I'd love to maybe start with State Lands, move to State Construction Office, and then maybe I can swing for the fence at the end.
All right, that'd be great. Director Scoggins.
Madam Chairwoman, Jennifer Scoggin, Director, Office of State Lands and Investments. I have with me today Ben Bump. He is our Assistant Director for our Field Services Division. He is our expert on Ranch A. So with that, I would yield to him.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Good afternoon, members of the committee. I've been asked to put together a brief history for you, so I apologize in advance. I'm going to kind of read it.
You can, yeah.
Please let me know if there's any questions along the way. Ranch A is located along Sand Creek, south of Beulah in Crook County, Wyoming. The ranch was constructed as a vacation retreat in 1932 by a millionaire publisher, Moses Annenberg, and included the main lodge, garage, apartment, barn, and pump house. The structures on the ranch were architect designed and at the time considered some of the finest rustic log buildings in Wyoming. In 1940, unfortunately, Mr. Annenberg was convicted by the federal government of income tax evasion, and in 1942, his family estate sold the property. For the next 20 years, a variety of individuals, including former Governor Nels Smith, owned Ranch A and used the property as a dude ranch and executive retreat. Notably, Ranch A was featured in National Geographic in 1956 as a Western resort. Ultimately, Ranch A was not profitable as a dude ranch, and in 1963, the federal government purchased the property for fish operations. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service constructed a fish genetics laboratory at Ranch A to study salmonid genetics. The laboratory was phased out beginning in 1979 and was replaced by the Fish Development Center. During various periods over that time, the lodge was used for offices, and laboratories were constructed in the basement. In 1992, the Ranch A Restoration Foundation was established as a nonprofit to raise funds for the restoration of the Ranch A complex and to partner with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to manage the grounds and buildings of Ranch A. Through the foundation's efforts, Ranch A was placed on the National Register of Historical Places on March 17, 1997. The Wyoming Fish and Wildlife Facility Act of 1996 directed the Secretary of the Interior to convey the property and facilities located at Ranch A to the state of Wyoming. The conveyance of the property was negotiated by the governor's office during the Garinger administration, and the property was deeded to the state on September 2nd, 1997. The deed contained restrictions limiting the uses of Ranch A to fish and wildlife management and educational and historical activities, and included reversionary clauses to return the property back to the federal government if those were not followed. From 1997 to 2004, the foundation leased Ranch A from the governor's office, during which time appropriations were made in the amounts of $350,000 and $125,000 to state parks for the maintenance and construction of projects on Ranch A. In May of 2004, an MOU agreement among state parks, state lands, and Game and Fish was developed, directing the agencies to collaboratively support the management of Ranch A by the foundation, with state parks assuming a role as the point of contact for day-to-day operations. In 2005, the Board of Land Commissioners issued a 10-year special use lease to the foundation to manage, operate, and maintain the property. The next big event was in December of 2014, and federal legislation was passed amending that law to remove the deed restrictions on the use of the property and all reversionary language, allowing the foundation more flexibility in allowable uses of the property to generate revenue. In 2015, OSLI revised and renewed the special use lease to the foundation for the next 25 years to 2040. From 2005 to 2018, a wide variety of maintenance and restoration projects were completed jointly by the foundation and the Office of State Lands and Investments. In 2018, House Bill 194 created the Ranch A account, requiring the Board of Land Commissioners to deposit all lease payments from Ranch A, as well as any gifts received for Ranch A, into the account specifically for the construction and maintenance projects. An appropriation of $100,000 was made to the account at that time. In 2019, State Construction Department, who you'll hear from, conducted a facilities assessment, as Director Glenn mentioned. And in 2023, Senate File 146 added $1 million to the Ranch A account for the aforementioned purposes. So that brings us up to today, and I'll stand for any questions.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Bump. Any questions about the history of Ranch A? And I guess we'll move to state construction.
Hello, I'm Suzanne Norton. I'm the administrator of the Construction Management Division within the State Construction Department. I'm an architect, not licensed in Wyoming. I've worked in this office since 2007, and I was intimately involved in the restoration project here at the Capitol. So I have a lot of historic preservation experience. I visited Ranch A in 2009 to talk about some of the deteriorating facilities. And then, did you mention that they had a major maintenance appropriation? You did, okay. And so my office is working jointly with Office of State Lands to help with the procurement and construction guidelines for projects that are known to be needed at this time. The facility.
Excuse me, was that the $23 million appropriation that was for the restoration?
Madam
Maintenance.
Chairwoman, yes.
Okay, thank you.
My apologies for the confusion. In 2017, 2018, a facility condition assessment was performed by construction management staff and a consultant that specializes in that kind of work. Some design charrettes were done by the community to develop ideas of what the property could become and what the property needed. I think that the facility condition assessment identified about $20 million worth of updates and remediation and deferred maintenance that would be required to bring the property up to current building codes for public use. In discussing the potential for Ranch A, which is a beautiful place. Director McComey sends his regrets. He had a conflict today, but in his evaluation of the properties, like this could be the coolest state park in the state. But it does have quite a lot of work that would have to be done, and you would need to be very, very careful in the way that work is done because of the historic nature of the facilities. I mean, nothing requires you to do so, but in order to be a thoughtful steward of such a great property, the State Construction Department would advise you to. I think that's my summary.
Any questions? Representative Angelos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have been to this Ranch A many times. I grew up camping around it, but I'm curious, how many acres is, I know there's the buildings and there's like a barn and stuff, but how, do you know the acreage property that it sits on?
Mr. Bump, do you know that?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Angelos, it's approximately 620 acres total.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, I think we'll move on to state parks and they can tell their story.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you all for filling in some of that missing information. If you haven't been to Ranch A, I've just happened to drive by it when I'm turkey hunting in the spring. It's beautiful. Sand Creek coming down, it's watercress, it's a spring-fed creek, lots of good wily fish to fly fish for, and the facilities there and the architecture is pretty darn neat. So from a state parks perspective, we can look at it and say, this may be something we can look at, but we go through a very detailed site criteria process. And I know I've talked to all of you about that, but the first part of that process is the landowner has to ask us to start through that process. But then we will go through every single aspect of what do we think visitation will be? Do we think we will need more employees? What is the operating expense? All through that process. And then obviously through the interim, we would come back and have those conversations with you. The 22 million, the 20 million scares, I think, all of us a little bit at this point in time. We have been struggling because we go down through these processes, we get to this point, and then the money and the funding doesn't show up. We have about $6.5 million major maintenance biennially. That's for our whole system. I can't take $5 million a biennium for the next 4 bienniums and put it in those facilities because my revenue generators such as Glendo and Buffalo Bill and Kirk Gowdy would be suffering because of that. So that will come out through the site criteria process if this does move forward, but it would take a substantial amount of funds. I think I would just leave it at that, Madam Chairman. We love the idea. We would love to see what the site criteria process comes out with. As you know, that involves a lot of public meetings as well. I don't know if anybody has even talked to this foundation yet about this potential. That would probably be a first start, and I'm not sure the process on that as well. But we'd be excited to look into it, but we're going in with eyes wide open.
Any questions for Director Glenn? Representative Singh?
Thank you, Director Glenn. Do you foresee this being one of those revenue generators that you had mentioned?
Director Glenn?
Madam Chairman, Representative Singh, I don't know that answer yet. I think that site criteria process would go through to do that. You know, when you look at 625 acres, there potentially could be a campground there. I don't believe there's a campground there now. There could be some other things that could go to bring in revenue generation. It could be run by a concessionaire, potentially where the whole thing is set up and run through a concessionaire versus having state employees work that. That's what that site criteria process would go through. I can say, when I talk about revenue generators, Representative Singh, none of our parks make money. The communities around the parks are the ones that get that $800 million, $600 million annually in economic impact. But it does have the potential to grow that.
Representative Larson?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So I guess as we're considering this as an interim topic, will our decision then stem some action? Because it sounds like you guys haven't started the site criteria process. So I just want to make sure we're not jumping the gun. Should we wait another interim before we start that interim process from the committee? Or do you anticipate getting site criteria process done prior to the interim?
Director Glenn?
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, our site criteria process traditionally takes well over a year to go through. And we have been kind of directed to take on some certain other projects initially first. So I think it would be a year-long process at a minimum. And we've had very little discussions with state lands on this to even know if that is something they are interested in looking at. And so I think there probably needs to be some discussions amongst us to have those conversations before us raising our hand saying we believe this should be a good interim topic.
Okay. Representative Burkhardt?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chairman. So for the panel, we have a number of these properties out there, and I apologize for my voice. I've got laryngitis and listening to previous testimony, listening to this, in my mind, I've added up close to 60, maybe even $80 million worth of work that is needed at state parks or historical sites and that sort of thing. Is that a good number? And it sounds like we keep adding to the department's plate without giving you adequate funding. Am I correct or am I off base?
Director Glenn?
Madam Chairman, Representative Burkhardt, great softball, thank you. I think when these bills go forward to take on new facilities, we do our due diligence and we come forward to you with a document saying this is what we believe in order to do it right, it costs. If we can get the funding to make that appropriate, it works out great. At times that does not happen due to two other issues. But as these things build, absolutely, I have to take away from my revenue generators to make sure a building isn't going to fall down. And the concern I have is when I hear to get it up to code, that's just getting it to code to where we can have visitors come and walk into the buildings. That doesn't include probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, Suzanne, that doesn't include everything else. So does that answer your question, sir?
Yes, but follow up.
Follow up?
So,
Go ahead.
Director, do you have a priority list of how you will take care of all of these properties? Every year we do a cease and transfer priority list for our towns to close landfills. Do you have a priority list on the various properties and the various projects?
Director Bloom.
Madam Chairman, Representative Burkhart, absolutely.
Okay.
We go through that list every single year, and there's a lot of times that you go, oh, we need to move this up here and we need to move this down, depending on the condition it's in. And that's not only for new capital construction, but also the major maintenance work that we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. For some reason or other, I've missed out on this discussion. Director, could you tell me where this Ranch A is located?
Madam Chairman, Representative Winter, Mr. Bump may be better than me. I know if you go just south of Beulah, up Sand Creek, and I do not recall, Ben, how far up it is.
Madam
Mr.
Chairwoman,
Bump.
Representative, like 10 miles south of the
That's,
interstate?
yeah, that's,
In that ballpark?
yeah.
Straight south of Beulah.
Any follow-up?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Where's Beulah?
Just before the South Dakota border on I-90.
Okay.
Exit 9, I'm told.
Madam
So
Chair,
northeast corner of the state then.
Yes, sir.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Winter, roughly 25 minutes west of Spearfish.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I just thought of something when Representative, Representative Winters asked about where it was. I think in the last year or so, the Nature Conservancy picked up quite a bit of land and property in that area to preserve. Does any of that border Ranch A, and is there the possibility of including them somehow in some of this work?
That's open to anybody.
Madam
Mr.
Chairwoman.
Bump.
Representative Burkhart, I'm not positive. I don't believe so. but I'm
Okay,
not
thank you.
positive.
Any other questions? Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So when Representative Burkhart mentioned the cease and transfer bill, that got me thinking, would the department see it as a benefit to set up a similar structure for your major maintenance costs that you're having to balance in your annual budget? Is that something we should look at in the interim, maybe as a topic to, so the legislature could help fund maybe some of these bigger projects that might, I don't know what your thoughts are.
Suzanne.
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, we've had some discussions over the past years. We've been thinking about Ranch A, and Ranch A has not been included in the square footage calculations for major maintenance. There is a little bit different funding mechanism thought to exist for Ranch A Foundation. However, there's nothing that prohibits us from doing so, so we've agreed that we will be adding that square footage for major maintenance for preservation purposes. However, I will tell you that that will not generate all that large of a calculation. And in terms of capital construction projects, the State Building Commission would have a difficult time prioritizing capital construction projects there without a defined governmental purpose.
Any other questions? So I have a question, probably just piggybacking off the Representative Burkhart's. Do you think that Ranch A is a good interim topic, or are we too soon? Do we have too many unknowns, especially with the foundation? I understand there's a lease till 2024 or 2040. Is that what you said? So I'm not sure that we want to get in the way of that lease. I don't know if there's a comment on that, Mr. Bump or Director Scoggins. Anybody?
Madam Chairwoman, I think it's worth mentioning that, yeah, Ranch A Restoration Foundation is critical to everything out there. I mean, that place is a gem, and the reason it's in the condition it's in is because of Ranch A Restoration Foundation. There's a lot of really committed folks up there that volunteer their time to keep that going forward. As far as from state land's perspective, you know, for the last 20 years, we've administered a lease. We've supported where we can. We've done things out of our operations budget. And we can continue doing that, of course, to keep helping Ranch A out, and especially with the assistance of State Construction Department to guide some of those projects as they do them. I think that, as with many issues, the main one will always be money. And the amount that they have to take on those projects, they do an incredible job of taking on one at a time when they have money and when appropriations go there. So I hope that's an answer.
Okay. So it kind of sounds like, oh, Suzanne.
Madam Chairman, I have a question and maybe just an observation as kind of a third-party neutral. I'm curious if State Lands needs direction to request that the site criteria process begin, if that takes legislative direction, if that's something that you can just request.
I don't know that answer. Go ahead.
Madam Chairwoman, I'm not sure I know that answer either. I think we've had some discussions with various legislators over the last year or so, sort of suggesting what it would look like for Ranch A to transfer and be part of state parks. And we have not objected to that. We've been interested in pursuing that, particularly with the amount of maintenance and repair that we understand may be required to preserve it. So we haven't really ventured down that road. It's been a lot of what ifs, and we have not, to my knowledge, Ben, unless you disagree, we haven't landed on the answer to that. And of course, we wouldn't want to pursue it without some sort of support.
Do you think that studying it in the interim of this committee is helpful? And a no is okay.
Madam Chairwoman, I don't think it would hurt, because I think it would get the issues out there, and perhaps the Ranch A Restoration Foundation can be part of that and
Right.
weigh in with whatever their concerns might be, but also maybe we would have a more global understanding of what that possibility of moving the facility to state parks would look like, or even if it's something that we should do. Like I said, at this point, it's just been kind of hypotheticals, at least to us, and certainly interested in exploring that.
Well, it sounds like you have a good relationship with the foundation, and we in no way want to taint that through not having them at the table. We certainly would have them at the table. It sounds like they have a love of the property and really want to do what's best, and so I think that would be good. So what's the feeling of the group of putting this on our interim topic list? Representative Larson.
Madam Chairman, I'm okay with it going on our interim topic list. Not necessarily, I mean, I would almost be opposed if it meant that we would go forward with the actual statute for the park itself, or but if we were just trying to make sure that we were addressing any statutory needs for the Office of State Lands and any corrections that need to happen before we move forward, then I would be in favor of that.
Okay. Any other comments on this as a possible? I think the outcome that I might see is an appropriation for upkeep and maintenance of the property, and maybe not a transfer to state parks or any of that, but just some money to take care of it. So I think, thank you all for your time and effort and energy. It was very insightful, and maybe I'll have to get over that way one of these days and go see it. Okay, back to the committee. The other things I have on my interim topic list is the outfitter board and adding fishing as part of the outfitter and guides. And I know we have a lot of discussion to have about that. So I think that's a good interim topic for us. The fishing study, this bill that's going forward, once that study's done, well, it will be done at the end of our interim meeting, so we'll just see where that goes. And then what I heard today was state parks major maintenance is a topic that we might want to take up. Representative Western. Is the Director of Mr. Lund still here?
look like it.
Okay.
Madam Chairwoman, in terms of additional topics, is now a good time to propose some of those?
It
or-
is, yeah.
Okay. Well, I certainly appreciate the list you suggested. You know, we are the tourism, recreation, and wildlife. Obviously, I'm a big wildlife guy, and hunting issues are very important to me. And I think something that might be worthwhile for us to consider is, you know, we have all heard about the trust management objectives for the lands, for state lands that are managed by the Office of State Lands and Public Investment. And one of the things they've talked about is that, you know, they have to consider things that generate revenue directly for the beneficiary, things that just generate revenue for, you know, for our schools, which is obviously oil and gas, mining, all that stuff. And as a sportsman, the one thing that I've heard over the years is, well, technically sportsmen don't generate any revenue directly to the beneficiary. And this is true. And that's something that's kind of bothered me for a while, because as a hunter, I want to pay my fair share. I want to contribute, right? I certainly don't want to think that I'm, you know, getting a free ride or not, you know, contributing to the management. And it's obviously the director and they can testify that it takes a lot of man hours and a lot of money to manage this enormous portfolio on behalf of the state. And so I know it gets kind of discussed in the past, but the idea of kind of having a, you know, a state land stamp, if you will, that sportsmen can purchase even for as little as, say, $5. That way it can be used to buy the office to help manage some of these lands. I know it's a very intricate topic, and there's a lot of just things we got to be careful of, and factors and considerations. I know obviously no one from Game and Fish is here currently. You know, there's Pittman Robertson considerations about that topic, but I think at the core of it, I know for myself and for a lot of sportsmen, you know, we're not directly contributing to the management of our state lands, and I think a lot of us really want to contribute. So.
Well, and we've had that conversation with non-consumptive users with hiking, biking, that sort of thing. I think we talked about a mountain bike sticker at one point. And so I think it's worth exploring that. Any other topics? Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So this might be something that judiciary might take up, but Representative Nemec, he brought a bill this session that failed introduction, and it's regarding state parks officers having
State law enforcement, state
yes,
parks law enforcement.
yeah,
That's, we
having
need to put that on our list.
jurisdiction outside of a state park. So I would like to see that as an interim topic, either in this committee or judiciary. So
Thank you for reminding me of that. I did tell him that we would take that up. And Director Glenn and I talked about that a while back, so about his bill. Any other ideas that we have? Okay, we have another week to think about it. I think we have crossover next week. So we should, I don't know if we have bills because ours died over there. We'll see. They did some tribal bills over there, and we'll maybe see the FBI bill. So we'll see what happens on crossover. So I think I would adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for coming. Oh, John, Representative Winter.
Madam Chairman, I think it would be wise for this committee to go ahead and have the LSO develop a plan for, or a bill for this fishing outfitter board
Okay,
at this time. And then we'd have something started anyway, and we could pursue that along with the interim topic.
okay. Yeah, we'll get that rolling then. I talked with Lee Livingston, Commissioner Livingston, and he said they're not as opposed on the outfitter board to just taking all the outfitter stuff, but I think we need to do some talking about that.
You know, that's been discussed a lot, and I've never heard anything about them wanting to take it, but maybe they've changed their mind.
Maybe they have. I think their feeling is an outfitter is an outfitter is an outfitter, and if you're hunting or fishing or guiding down the river or rock climbing guiding, that you're an outfitter and that you should, that there should be one board that takes care of all the outfitting in the state, no matter the venue. That would be good, but I'm not sure we can talk people into it, so we can try. Okay, any other comments before we break and go back upstairs? Great, thank you, committee, for all your hard work. I really appreciate it. Go team. Interim topic, our deadline is March 1st. Interim topic's March 1st. So
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah.
Thanks.